There are 84 million acres of wildlife in the United States National Park System. These parks have been the site of many missing person cases over the past 100 years, especially because of how remote and unpopulated many of these hiking trails are. While many of these missing hikers are found, a high number are never discovered, leaving us to puzzle over the mysterious circumstances of their disappearances many years later. Ruthanne Rupert was 49 years old on August 14th of 2000, the day she went missing and the last day she was ever seen. The Florida native was on a trip to California to go backpacking at Yosemite National Park, which was a frequent pastime for her. She was an experienced climber who had even climbed a mountain with a frozen foot. Rupert also had a prosthetic eye, and unfortunately, on the morning of August 14th, she woke up with an eye infection in her one good eye. This infection may have been a factor in her disappearance. As a result of the infection, Rupert had to receive medical care around noon of that day, postponing her plans to meet with a backpacking group traveling across the park. Instead, she rented a cabin in Curry Village, the largest lodging facility in Yosemite, and went shopping. This was perhaps the last area she was seen, and a search and rescue operation later failed to find any trace of her. However, witnesses have provided additional evidence that sheds light on what may have happened to her. Witnesses believe Rupert planned a day hike from Yosemite Falls to the Foresta area. However, while there is evidence for this theory, there are many elements of it that don't make sense. For example, she had left her hiking supplies behind in her room, an odd move for an experienced hiker. She was seen in Curry Village and at the medical clinic, but had told nobody about any plans to go on a solo hike herself. In fact, the only clue ever discovered about Ruthanne Rupert's whereabouts was found 8 years later in 2008, when her backpack was recovered in the Fireplace Creek drainage. The area is almost 8 miles away from Curry Village, which suggests that she did go on a hike like witnesses suspected. However, how the backpack ended up in that location and why it took so long to find is still a mystery. Did Rupert's eye infection and use of a prosthetic eye result in a fatal fall along some hidden mountain path? While there are no reasons to think she deliberately harmed herself, it is possible she could be somewhere outside Yosemite. For all the possible theories of her whereabouts, her disappearance remains unsolved today. Polly Melton lived in Jacksonville, Mississippi with her husband Bob, but they had a tradition of joining their friends for several months a year at the Deep Creek campground on the North Carolina side of the Great Smoky Mountains. She was well acquainted with the area, having called it her second home for over 20 years. Polly's final trip was in 1981, and she was last seen on September 25th of that year. That day, she and 2 friends went for a walk on Deep Creek Trail, picking a trail marked as easy. But on the way back, Polly noticeably picked up the pace and rushed out of view over a hill. After that, her friends couldn't find her, and she never returned to camp. An author named Juanita Baldwin later immortalized Polly's story in her book entitled Unsolved Disappearances in the Great Smoky Mountains: True Mysteries of Persons Who Vanished Without a Trace and Other Disappearances. Baldwin points out many theories about the circumstances behind Polly's disappearance. For example, her extensive experience with these trails makes it hard to believe that she got lost, and the search that ensued should have been able to find her if she did. It also seems unlikely that she was quickly and quietly kidnapped, especially because of her large size and height. Baldwin's personal theory, which has no direct proof but seems possible, is that Polly chose to make a quick escape, arranging a place to be picked up by someone in the park. She had been married 3 times, and her sick husband may have been a burden to her. The theory goes that she made a new life for herself, and there is some further evidence of this. Over a year later, a check was cashed in her name in Birmingham, Alabama, though it was impossible to conclusively match the signature to her own. It's impossible to say whether Polly did deliberately leave her husband and friends, perhaps running away with a lover. If she did, she took cigarettes with her but left behind her cash, ID, and medications that she was taking for high blood pressure and nausea. An investigation failed to turn up any conclusive answers, and to this day, Polly has never been found, though her missing person case with the National Park Service is still open. On April 4th, 1991, Daniel Lynn Campbell was dropped off with his dog, Freckles, at the Hell-Roaring Creek trailhead in Yellowstone National Park. He was planning a 4-day hike to Jardine, Montana, during which he would collect lucrative elk antlers. This practice was illegal, but served as a popular way of making money for locals. At the end of the hike, his girlfriend Tracy would be there to pick him up. But he never arrived in Jardine and has never been found. When Tracy reported Dan's disappearance, the National Park Service listed him as an overdue hiker, or someone assumed to be lost in the park. However, it took a day after the listing for a ground search to commence on April 9th, and a full-scale search didn't begin until April 11th. This search involved people on foot, on horseback, and flying overhead, but it did not turn up any conclusions. Temperatures were dangerously cold in the mountainous terrain, so the search itself was risky, and the snow made it difficult to spot any possible bodies, even if search teams did pass nearby Dan. In the 10 days since Dan had gone missing, the area of the park had been covered in 6 to 8 feet of snow, making his survival unlikely. 2 months after Dan's disappearance, a new group of volunteers went looking again, with the melted snow giving them new hope. They were stunned to stumble upon 2 different campsites with untouched supplies and food, perhaps belonging to Dan or other illegal elk antler collectors. It seems probable that, like many other unlucky hikers at national parks, Dan Campbell got injured or lost and ended up losing his life. This was a particularly frequent phenomenon at the time at Yellowstone. 4 hikers had gone missing in northern Yellowstone in the past 5 years, but the sheriff and other park authorities pushed the narrative that Dan was hiding out and surviving on his own, perhaps because of financial troubles and the illegality of his antler collecting. Eventually, the searches for Dan petered out, perhaps partly because of authorities' unwillingness to spend more time and resources. His shady antler collecting cast a negative light on the park, and there have been many ulterior motives for burying his story, which could further glorify an illegal business. As a result, we may never know what happened to Dan Campbell. On August 1st, 1957, Mary Margaret Beay left home to go work at the Bright Angel Lodge in Grand Canyon National Park. Later, after leaving to go for drinks at the Grand Canyon Inn with friends, she was seen getting into a vehicle with 2 unknown men. She was never heard from again. Beay's family didn't realize she was missing until they went to visit her at work the following day. However, the missing person report led nowhere, and there were no significant developments until October of 1958, over a year later. On October 31st, human remains were found outside the Grand Canyon that belonged to Beay. The clothes were similar to what she was last seen wearing, which included a white sweater and capris. However, it was eventually determined that the remains belonged to someone else, someone older and indigenous. Mysteries abound in this case, and it's been over 50 years without any real developments. Some acquaintances told authorities that Beay may have fled to build a new life in Los Angeles, or even that she married and built a family in Oregon. Beay's family has denied these suggestions, though. As a member of the Navajo Nation, Beay is part of a pattern of young indigenous women disappearing. Many indigenous advocates say that these cases are underexposed in the media, especially compared to comparable cases of white women that go missing. That makes it all the more important to spotlight these grim stories. If you have any information about the disappearance of Mary Beay, you're asked to contact the Coconino County Sheriff's Office at 928-774-4523. Perhaps one of the most chilling stories of a missing hiker is that of 24-year-old Derek Joseph Luking, a Northern Virginian man who went missing at the Great Smoky Mountains National Park on March 17th of 2012. Luking had a clear intention to leave behind friends and family. His friends and family had been looking for him since 2 days before, when he didn't show up for work. His family drove from their home in Virginia to Tennessee, where they found documents on his computer that he'd made reservations for a hotel at the park. Surveillance videos turned up footage of him leaving the Microtel Inn and Suites in Cherokee, North Carolina. There was a liquor bottle found on the floor of his hotel room. This led Luking's family to embark on a search that day, and they found his white Ford Escape at the newfound Gap area of the park. The car contained lots of newly bought survival gear, including an axe, a pocket knife, a knife sharpener, parachute cord, a headlamp, a tent, granola bars, flashlight, compass, sleeping bag, and a fire starter. It's odd that Luking didn't bring these supplies with him into the wilderness, though. But the strangest clue of all is the note his family found in the car, reading, "Don't try to follow me." It's clear that Luking did not want to be found. The most common and obvious theory is that Luking took his own life, especially judging by the note. His own father had noticed that that year he had increased his drinking and smoking and didn't seem happy with his life. However, the people in Luking's life generally reject this theory. Was the note really written by him, or could someone else have left it in the car to hide their own foul play? It's also possible Luking may have had an accident on what he intended to be a solo adventure, inspired by the Bear Grylls TV series Man vs. Wild. A search was conducted to look for Luking, and other hikers were questioned about seeing him, and yet there are many other bizarre details to this story. For example, nobody seemed to remember seeing him, even though he'd been out in the public of a busy area. Human remains were eventually found in the park nearby where he had disappeared, but they ended up belonging to Michael Giovanni, a different man who had gone missing in the park. A skull fragment had been recovered, but a further search could not find anything else from Giovanni either. There are many contradictions in the story of Derek Luking. Why buy survival gear if you are planning to harm yourself? Could there be a nefarious explanation for two hikers going missing in the same area around the same time? This mystery remains unsolved to this day. If you have any information that could help find Luking, you're asked to call investigative services with the National Park Service at 888-653-0009. Southern Florida's Everglades National Park is an immense and jungle-like expanse consisting mostly of water. The park covers around 1.5 million acres and is known for its mysterious history. The site holds over 175 unsolved homicide cases that date back to 1965. Some cast the blame on the population of predatory creatures, including alligators and bull sharks. A section of the park has become known as Alligator Valley, which is said to be in the area in which the victims are discarded. There have been further theories that suggest supernatural happenings there, as well as the mysterious disappearances of aircraft. In 1945, a group of Navy aircraft had taken off from Fort Lauderdale on a routine 2-hour flight to the coast of Florida. The leader of the group had radioed the control tower, stating that they'd become lost. Several frantic communication attempts were made, but these would cease entirely. A rescue airship would then be sent out to find them, but it had also suddenly become lost. These planes have birthed the legend of the Bermuda Triangle, where ships and planes would disappear without any obvious explanation. These aircraft were never found, and some believe that they crashed into the national park. One of the stranger mysteries is that of the Lost City, a 3-acre island found in a remote area of the park south of Alligator Valley that's become subject to a legendary mystery. Throughout history, the Lost City has been said to be a Seminole settlement, a Confederate soldier's hideout, or a moonshine operation. The island does not appear on maps, nor are there any roads leading to it. It was registered in the Florida State Archives as an archaeological site and was subject to a few studies by state archaeologists and wildlife experts who'd found wooden shack ruins, a canoe, and even some native artifacts. Among these, a large iron kettle was also found, one that's used to distill moonshine. Some of the items that had been found were dated hundreds of years old, but most of them were found to have come from the Prohibition era, when it was used as a hub of a bootlegging operation, presumably. It's uncertain as to why the Seminole inhabitants would have abandoned these settlements. It's theorized that Confederate soldiers had met with a grisly battle with the Native Americans for trespassing on their sacred land. A more recent legend regarding the Everglades, though, is that of Al Capone. It's said that he owned a speakeasy in the town during the Prohibition, and may have even been running an alleged moonshine operation there. Since this was illegal, there are no paper trails that connect Al Capone to the Lost City, and so this part of the mystery and legend can't be confirmed or verified. Another mystery speaks of a supposed ghost ship that was said to be a private vessel in the 18th or possibly 19th century that had targeted a merchant ship. The merchant vessel had led the pirates on quite the chase before being caught in Cape Florida. The pirates were described as merciless and made each man walk the plank into the murky swamp of the Everglades. But the skipper's wife was able to get her revenge by cursing the pirates, after which a large tidal wave swept the pirate ship inland, and to this day it's doomed to roam the waterways in the swamplands while it tries to make its way back to sea. Native hunters and some locals have documented seeing the specter of a rusty ship that wanders through the swamp's depths in an aimless manner. There'd been another mystery concerning Eastern Airlines Flight 401 back in 1972. The flight had taken off from New York and was headed for Miami. The plane had crashed over the Everglades, leaving only a handful of survivors. It was discovered that the crash was caused by a technical issue which had been fixed, and some of the parts were used in other airliners. On board the craft was Bob Loft, the pilot, and Don Repo, who was a flight engineer. On the airlines on which the salvage parts were used, reports had come in that other pilots, flight officers, and a vice president of Eastern Airlines had seen the ghosts of both Repo and Loft. The vice president allegedly had a conversation with who he assumed to be the captain, but soon came to realize it was the pilot of the crashed plane. Then the apparition quickly vanished. An oven had also been mysteriously repaired, despite the engineers stating that he'd not carried such a repair out. It would later be reported that a flight attendant had seen a man who resembled Repo working on the oven. The strangest incident was on board the TriStar 318, when various witnesses reportedly saw the engineer's face in the oven before the ghost warned them of a fire. Adding to this was the allegation that the repaired oven was aboard Flight 401. Could the Everglades have preserved the ghosts of the engineer and the pilot, as well as enchanting the salvaged pieces? This question may remain a mystery for eternity. Back in 1980, Paul Braxton Fugate, a 41-year-old man, had disappeared somewhere within the Chiricahua National Monument situated in southeastern Arizona. What's strange about this case is that Paul was actually a park ranger for the area. On the 13th of January of that year, he left the Chiricahua Visitor Center to embark on a patrolling hike in the faraway ranch region of the park. He then announced to an aide that he would be doing a trial. After this, the ranger was never seen or heard from again. Concerns began to rise when he'd failed to return by 4:30 that afternoon. Generally, if a ranger had gone on a solo patrol in a national park and they failed to return, they're often found trapped or stranded and possibly injured. This was not the case here, as no clues were ever unearthed as to Paul's whereabouts. Although search teams had searched extensively throughout the area numerous times, no sign of Paul had come about. It was stated that investigators had suspected the involvement of foul play during the early days, but it's unclear as to what led them to this suspicion. A formal missing person case was opened and remains as such today. During the first few years following the ranger's disappearance, the reward for any information on locating him had grown to $20,000. In recent years, with renewed focus, the National Park Service had then offered a reward of up to $60,000 for any information that led to the discovery of Paul, or the arrest or conviction of whoever was responsible for the disappearance. It had been around 2 p.m. when the ranger had embarked on the trial. wearing his green and gray Park Service uniform that included the official National Park Service arrowhead patch on his upper sleeve. Paul had also been wearing Red Wing boots and was carrying a green parka. He also had a gold-colored ranger badge pinned on his chest. He was described as being a monument naturalist who would answer visitors' questions, curate exhibitions, and put together trail guides as well as plant lists. Getting lost was an unlikely scenario. The Chiricahuas are part of a chain of isolated sky islands that extend 5,400 feet above the Sonoran Desert floor. Hoodoos, the eroded tuff spires, peek out from the ridgetop forests, and wildcats prowl below. For all the hideouts in the park, there are only a few areas that one would patrol. There was an 8-mile lone cul-de-sac, a single campground, and a system of trails that could be completed the same day. Paul, unfortunately, had not taken his radio with him, nor his ID, wallet, or his pocket glass for plant examination. It was the following morning when contact was made with the Cochise County Sheriff's Office, and they sent in a search team of 22 men and women and a dog. More search efforts were carried out, which included 16 volunteers and a helicopter, but nothing was ever found. It's asked that should anyone have any information regarding this missing person case, they contact the NPS Investigative Branch by phoning or texting the ISB at 888-653-0009, or by going online to nps.gov/ISB and clicking on the Submit a Tip option, or emailing nps_ISB@nps.gov. The Great Sand Dunes National Park and Preserve has been the subject of various mysteries, which include the extraterrestrial life forms and their spaceships. One need not break into Area 51 if they'd like to spot a UFO, aliens, or otherworldly beasts, because the Great Sand Dunes seem to have it all. The national park can be found in the shadow of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains and is said to attract otherworldly beings. The preserve is the home of a diverse landscape that includes the tallest sand dunes in North America. Earth inhabitants may partake in hiking, splashing in the Medano Creek, camping, or soaring down the sand dunes when visiting this park. UFO sightings here have dated back to the Spanish conquistadors in the 1600s. The dunes and the valley that surround them are a hotspot for UFO sightings and other paranormal events. The valley even had a UFO watchtower, which supposedly started as a joke, but now has 70 sightings linked to it that have been documented since 2000. The national park can be found in Colorado and has been named the Bermuda Triangle of the West. As the night falls over the watchtower, the skies transform into a black canvas that's littered with stars and distant galaxies. With this, there comes an overwhelming sense of isolation and stillness. One writer published an article in which he details his trip to the Great Sand Dunes and the popular watchtower. He explained that he'd not seen a UFO or an alien as he waited there for hours, but he'd not given up. The writer settled himself on the watchtower, waiting, until finally a thin white light appeared. It was a quarter-mile east and was blinking as it moved low and quick across the sky, but there was no sound. It was not just aliens and UFOs that made up all the mysteries surrounding the Great Sand Dunes. Back in 1938, Jack Williams, mounted on his horse, was riding through the west side of the park when he came across granite rocks that were shaped like slender columns. They were sticking about 6 inches out from the sand. He dismounted and kicked one of the stones, thinking it would fall over. After digging and pulling on the 25-inch long stone, it eventually dislodged, and all 10 pounds fell into his hands. He had no idea what it was, but someone had certainly taken great care in sculpting it. It was later theorized by a Park Service volunteer, Marilyn Martirano, that they were pestles used for crushing and grinding, but they seemed too heavy and bulky as compared to other pestles. Many theories abound regarding these curious granite rocks, where some say they were a type of agricultural tool, and others believed they were used to crush the remains of the roaming bison that were plentiful during the 1800s. But some park officials knew that these stones were predominantly found near wetlands or former wetlands, giving rise to the idea that the ancient civilizations had tied nets to them to catch ducks. But none of these theories seemed to add up. Martirano would later become an archaeologist, but she still could not figure out what these stones were, and so she turned to sources through YouTube, but still she'd not found anything that matched up. It was on the evening that she had to return the stones to the park that she received a link from a friend. It was due to French paleomusicologist Eric Gontier that Martirano had come to find that the stones, when tapped, would make a strong musical tone that shattered the silence in her living room. The stones were musical instruments, but mysterious ones at that. The Great Sand Dunes were not only known for their immense dunes, but also for their otherworldly visitors, the extraterrestrials and their ships, and also the strange granite slabs that produced sounds of the ancient world. 27-year-old Terrence Woods Jr. was last seen in Idaho on the 5th of October in 2018. It's been alleged that Woods vanished after he was separated from the production crew during a documentary film on the Penman Mines. On the 30th of September, he'd arrived at the airport and taken a flight to Montana, after which he called his father to inform him that everything had gone well. In Montana, he would go on to meet up with his 12-person crew to start filming for the first season of Gold Rush, a docuseries on Discovery Channel. On the 3rd of October, Woods unexpectedly rang his father and told him that he would be coming home early on the 10th, but didn't explain why this was. He, along with the crew, would arrive in Idaho the following day, and everything, as far as anyone was concerned, appeared fairly normal. It would later be discovered that Woods had emailed the production company that he worked for and stated that he would be cutting the trip short due to concerns for his mother's well-being. On the 5th of October, the crew went to the Penman Mines in Nez Perce National Forest to begin the documentary. The last social media post that Woods made was of a forest captioned Idaho. Crew members would later say that he'd been acting strangely and allegedly tried to grab a drone from the sky. He reportedly had an anxiety attack that same morning, but the idea that he was suffering from anxiety was not known to his family. Sometime around 5:30 p.m., as the crew began to pack up, Woods would tell 2 local women who he was helping with transport that he needed to use the restroom. He was heading into the forest where he dropped his radio before disappearing, never to be seen again. That evening, a missing person report was filed by the crew with the Idaho County Sheriff's Office. The call to 911 had stated that the missing man had a breakdown earlier that day, but according to family members, Woods didn't have any history of mental health issues. A week-long search was carried out thereafter with the assistance of dog units, helicopters, and ground searchers, but unfortunately no clues as to the whereabouts had surfaced. The members of the production crew expressed that they tried to catch up to him, but the terrain in the area was rough and unpredictable. They tracked his steps until they no longer could to an area where they believed he'd gotten down the road. Since the disappearance, there's been no activity on his phone, social media, or bank account. There's so far been no evidence to suggest that Terrence Woods Jr. met with foul play, and the circumstances surrounding his disappearance are unclear. The following was expressed in a statement from the sheriff's office, saying, quote, "No leads were obtained from the previous 7 days of searching, and no signs of Mr. Woods have been located in the search area or the expanded search area." Woods has black shaved hair and brown eyes. He's a height of 5 foot 9 inches and weighed 130 pounds at the time of his disappearance. He also has a distinct oval tattoo on the inside of his left wrist. He was wearing a light brown sweatshirt and black cargo pants on the day that he'd gone missing. It's asked that should anyone have any useful information on this missing person, that they contact the Idaho County Sheriff's Office at 208-983-1100, with case number 1810081. Hawaii Volcanoes National Park is the host of a series of hotel buildings that are known collectively as Volcano House. According to the National Park Service, the original building was opened in 1846 and has since been replaced. When most people check into a hotel in Hawaii, they expect comfort, an ocean view, and themed decorations. They don't anticipate that they'll be staying awake through the night, afraid of paranormal events. Initially, the building was a modest one-room shelter made from grass and native Ohio wood. The replacement hotel had later burned to the ground and had to be rebuilt. Over the last 8 decades, various changes and additions have been made to it. While it may be beautiful and mysterious, some visitors have reportedly been disturbed by ghostly presences. There have been cases where the guests have seen the ghost of an elderly woman roaming the property. Often she's seen in the halls and in rooms that are occupied by the guests. It's not been said as to who the woman might be or why she roams the hotel. There have been sightings of a white ghost dog that appears on the entrance road, and many believe it to be Pale, the Hawaiian goddess of fire and volcanoes. Visitors believe that the dog is the goddess there to warn them of ill happenings. These standard ghost stories are overshadowed by the stories of the goddess. She's housed close by in the active volcano caldera, and so the guests at Volcano House take her legend rather seriously. Hotel proprietors seek to console Pele by offering gin and even returning the lava rocks that are taken by park tourists. These rocks are said to carry a curse for those who initially collect them and remove them from the area. Some have even been known to mail the rocks back to the national parks as an apology, hoping that the goddess would lift the curse from them. It's not been disclosed as to what these individuals had experienced in terms of a curse after removing these sacred rocks. There are said to be various haunted hotels within the national park, but none of them are quite as remote as Volcano House. Aside from the out-of-control kitchen fire in the 1940s, the hotel was also subject to an earthquake. No one seems to know where the ghosts would have originated from, or why they chose to settle in Volcano House. In both the disasters that occurred, it's not been specified as to whether or not there were any fatalities. Perhaps the ghosts are from the cursed ones, who took the volcanic rocks and failed to return them throughout the history of the national park. In September of 2023, Chad Palen, a 49-year-old hiker, went missing from the Rocky Mountain National Park. Chad's hike began at the East Inlet Trailhead near Grand Lake on the 27th. It was on this day that he was last heard from as well. His itinerary included a 28-mile route of established trails, as well as some off-trail journeys through steep talus slopes. It was around noon that day when he was last heard from. The text that was received by an unspecified individual indicated that he was almost at the summit of Mount Alice, around 7 miles from Bear Lake. It was found that he'd not taken this route before, but was an experienced trail runner who had done a number of the park's routes previously, including Long's Peak, which he'd done more than 30 times. As part of the investigation, the Rocky Mountain National Park Search and Rescue Team reviewed images that were collected from the air reconnaissance operations and the ground operations. It was only on the 28th of September that Chad was reported overdue, as rangers confirmed that his car was still parked at the North Inlet Trailhead on the west end. Park officials announced later during the search efforts that this would be suspended due to weather conditions. It was confirmed that a search team would patrol once the weather warranted it, and further actions were to be considered. A closure had been placed on the park on the 5th of October to limit the scent distractions when dog teams were brought in. This was soon lifted as the efforts proved futile. It was further stated that any clues that are reported will be investigated as the investigation continues for the search of Chad Palen. By the weekend of the 7th of October, the searches didn't reveal any clues as to his whereabouts. It was after 2 weeks of searching that the search for the trail runner was suspended. The search for the missing runner was extensive and thorough. It included 77 people and a drone crew. Aerial photographs and drone footage were extensively reviewed as well. Search teams consisting of ground searchers, dog teams, and State of Colorado Department of Fire Prevention and Control were all involved in the search. Chad is detailed as being 5 foot 7 inches tall and weighs 155 pounds. He had brown hair and blue eyes. He's said to be a fit runner and has trail running and marathon experience. He's thought to be wearing a black ultralight jacket, black shorts or black leggings, and is equipped with a gray fanny pack. He additionally had a personal navigation device with him, but it wasn't designed for emergency assistance. GoFundMe pages were set up in order to aid the family financially, and over $19,000 have been raised. Should anyone have any information on the missing individual, you're encouraged to contact the National Park Service Investigative Services Bureau tip line at 888-653-0009. Located in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, the Gettysburg National Military Park preserves the landscape of the Battle of Gettysburg. The battle lasted 3 days, from the 1st of July to the 3rd, in 1863, during the American Civil War. It was here that some strange reports of paranormal activity have come about. It's been witnessed by some that the spirits of the battle linger there. The battlefield consists of 11,360 acres, all of which are said to be haunted. For the past 100 years, these sightings or events have been reported. There have been many cases of ghostly cries of wounded soldiers, and there's been the emergence of an image that includes that of a ghost, which is believed to be the Confederate General Robert E. Lee, among other ghostly photographs. One aspect of these hauntings is that of the ghost train. Tourists can take a 90-minute ride across the battlefield, and during this, there have been stories of the smell of cigar smoke suddenly entering the train, and even the witnessing of soldiers roaming the train or even near the tracks. Most of the sightings have been reported by some Civil War reenactors. While dressed in period costumes, these individuals restage the battle, but some have come face to face with the real thing. Rain Hawk, a reenactor, and his friend have been approached by a figure who was too realistic to just be another participant. The figure gave them each 2 cartridges that looked incredibly realistic and then vanished into thin air. Live ammunition was not allowed at Gettysburg for the last 100 years, and Ray, an expert, was able to determine that these cartridges were definitely genuine, a Civil War issue, vintage 1863. In another story, it was detailed that in 1993, some friends had been at the battlefield for reenactments. One day they hiked along a creek and came across a man who was lying in the bushes. Richard Capp had stated the following, saying, quote, "He appeared to be a man laying there, but he wasn't solid like you and I are. I mean, he was more of a hazy mist." Capp went on to explain that he was shivering and appeared to be in a lot of pain. During the battle, Pennsylvania Hall served as a field hospital, but today it's the offices of the Gettysburg College. There have been cases where some have heard the echoing cries of wounded soldiers. 2 school administrators were alone in the building and were using the elevator when the doors suddenly opened to a Civil War-looking hospital. The women had panicked, and suddenly one of the orderlies had turned to them and looked as if they needed help with the task. The 2 had told their story to the security officer on duty in the college. He, however, didn't believe in ghosts, but was certain that something had scared them. Perhaps this hallucination was merely imaginary, or the Gettysburg ghosts are trapped there and cursed to roam the battlefield for all eternity. On the 29th of April in 1981, Maurice Gordon Damitz, also known as Doc, had disappeared from the Rampart Range Road near Devil's Head Lookout in Colorado's Pike National Forest. On the 29th of April in 1981, the 83-year-old Reverend had gone on a trip along with his friend David McSherry. They were searching for topaz near the picnic area of Topaz Point, Devil's Head. Doc was last seen rock hunting around Rampart Range Road, Douglas County, and McSherry was no more than just 50 yards away from him. The man had returned to check in on Doc and informed him that they would soon be going home, and about 15 minutes later he returned, again to get him into the car. But Doc was gone, along with his tools. The man was never seen again despite the searches in many passing decades. McSherry was doubtful that he'd returned to the car, but went to have a look anyway, but he wasn't there. He searched for a bit before flagging down a motorist. Later that evening, a search was conducted by the local sheriff, and thereafter a canine unit was called in, but they couldn't pick up any scent belonging to Doc. A 5-day search ensued and also proved futile. There was no sign of vital fluid, clothing, or any tools. It further disclosed that Doc had bad knees as well as other medical problems and was reliant on McSherry to get around. Wandering off on his own was most unlikely. As per the Colorado Bureau of Investigation's report, Doc was born in 1906, making him 75 years old at the time of his disappearance. But it's widely reported that he was 83 years old at the time. He's described as having blue eyes and gray hair. He was a height of 5 feet 9 inches and weighed around 150 pounds. Doc also wore eyeglasses. The Pike National Forest is located in the Front Range west of Colorado Springs. The forest encompasses around 1,106,604 acres in the Clear Creek, Park, Teller, Jefferson, Douglas, and El Paso counties. Within the forest, there's a large artificial body of water, the Rampart Reservoir. Rampart Range Road is a 38.4-mile-long road that travels the crest of Rampart Range. Due to there being no signs of the missing man, theories began to spike. Some suggested that he was never in the national park, and McSherry fabricated the story. Others also blamed McSherry and stated that the motive had been a giant topaz find, but this was deemed unlikely, and McSherry was not suspected of foul play. Doc was a devout Christian and a former pastor, which ruled out a few of the other theories. To this day, there have been no signs of the missing man, and his case remains open. The Joshua Tree National Park is located in California and consists of 792,623 acres, of which 591,000 are designated wilderness. The national park stretches over some rugged terrain that appears to be deceptively barren and is actually home to various ecosystems and plant and animal life, including the legendary Yucca Man. There have been many sightings of some strange beings in this national park, beings that are referred to by many names, including the Mojave Bigfoot, the Marvin of the Mojave, and the Sierra Highway Devil. People who have lived in the Antelope Valley long enough know the name of one or more of these famous cryptids, mostly the Yucca Man. The creature is said to be the desert-adapted version of a Sasquatch that lives in Southern California, Arizona, and Nevada. The first sightings of him were documented in the early 1970s around the Antelope Valley. He's described as an 8-foot-tall beast that is covered in unkempt and stringy hair. With its lumbering gait, the cryptid may be a relative of Bigfoot. While the mysterious beast has been seen in various areas, the most recent sightings have come from the Joshua Tree National Park. The first legends and sightings of the Yucca Man began early on and started as a story that involved a Marine who was knocked unconscious by the creature. But most of the reports have come from hikers and campers in the national park. It was reported that campers had their tents open in the middle of the night by these creatures, and there's on one occasion a blurry image of a large footprint that's been used as evidence. Another looming piece of evidence had come from the Hidden Valley campground. It was a blurry snapshot of the cryptid. The figure looks much like the iconic Bigfoot from the Patterson-Gimlin film in 1967. While some legendary creature researchers say that the Yucca Man lives among other mammals, the California natives had something else to say. These civilizations existed there before European colonization, and they considered these animals to be supernatural entities, and the names have been translated to words such as hairy devils. The natives would take extra care to avoid the areas in which these creatures would be seen. One of the most recent reports came from 2012 at Devil's Punch Bowl, where it was documented that a hairy figure was stalking the hikers in Big Rock Canyon. It's not certain if we may ever confirm the existence of the Yucca Man, or even Bigfoot, but it certainly makes for a compelling story, and a true local mystery that's been around for quite some time. 25-year-old Prabdeep Sran disappeared in May of 2013. Prab was a Brampton hiker who'd been hiking in Australia's snowy mountains. He'd been on Mount Townsend the day that he vanished. Narrowing down exactly what the hiker's movements were proved a difficult task, leading to the baffling case of Prabdeep Sran. It's uncertain as to what his intentions were on Mount Townsend, or if he had the necessary supplies with him. Due to this lack of information, all the pieces of his final steps cannot be put together. The case had been a game of supposition and became one of the greatest outdoor mysteries of Australia. The man had been living on Australia's Gold Coast, and 1 year prior to his disappearance, he left surfing behind to engage on a touring holiday that would finish in Melbourne, 1,700 kilometers away. Unfortunately, Prab never reached his destination. There were only two things that were for certain. First, the hiker had hired a van and drove it to Charlotte Pass, and second, he never brought said van back. It was later discovered that he'd not informed anyone of his hiking plans. The first sign that something was amiss had been when the van failed to be returned to the company. The New South Wales police had suspended the search after a mere 2 weeks, which caused Prab's family to jump in. They continued to finance private searches, and family members, including his cousin Raj and his sister Mandeep, led the way to the snowy mountains to set up a base there and organize a few search parties. It was after no further evidence was uncovered that the family made the decision to abandon the search and return in November of that same year with the Canadian Search and Rescue Team. The hope was that the snow would have melted, revealing clues or even a miracle, but again, nothing was found. Due to the long distance, Prab's family had to rely on local assistance. A man from Sydney, Dave Jarvis, was one of the main searchers who'd put in many weeks of work to find the missing hiker. It was with the help of Jarvis that it was determined that the hiker was not the only one leaving Charlotte Pass on the 14th of May, 2013. 4 friends had been there as well, and were embarking on the same loop as Prab had intended. Along with them, they had taken a video camera, which revealed the full extent of a blizzard. When their journey began, the conditions had been admirable, but by the afternoon, the snow was hitting their faces and freezing winds were whipping up. The group took shelter in Seaman's hut to wait out the storm until the next day, but unfortunately they never saw a sign of the missing man, and we may never know how close they came to him. Further information began to present itself as time went on. It was alleged on the 22nd of May that maintenance workers at the Opera House hut reportedly heard a voice calling out and tried to track the sound, but they couldn't find the source. Prob was last seen on the 13th of May in 2013. He's believed to have been wearing a red or black rain jacket, as well as flannel with a fleece-hooded inner layer. He's said to be a height of 6'1" and has black hair and brown eyes. Should anyone have any information on the whereabouts of this missing hiker, you're encouraged to email helpfindprob@gmail.com or to phone 02614-52119. On the morning of November 10, 1962, 3 planes took off from Payne Air Force Base in Washington. Only 2 of those would return. For over 50 years, the location of Captain Robert Lucas and his plane have remained a mystery of Olympic National Park. Captain Lucas had been in the Air Force for 11 years at the time of his disappearance. He was part of the 64th Fighter Interceptor Squadron and flew an F-102 supersonic interceptor. It played an important role during that period of the Cold War. If the Soviet Union or any of the US's other enemies sent aircraft with nuclear weapons to attack the mainland, Captain Lucas and his squadron would be scrambled to intercept and take down the planes before they became a threat. The Cold War hadn't gone hot yet, but the squadron needed to remain on guard in case the terrible day when they were needed occurred. November 10th was one of these training days. Even before the training mission began, there were problems. 3 planes were supposed to take part, but there were technical issues. The mission went ahead anyway, and just after 9:30 a.m., Major William Turner took off from the Payne Air Force Base near Everett. A few days later, Captain Lucas would follow him, both planes heading west over the mostly untouched wilderness of Olympic National Park. Turner soon reported that his data link was inoperable, but Lucas had no such issues. As they approached Mount Olympus, radar operators merged the signals from 2 planes. It was a typical procedure as the 2 planes were flying close to one another. The last time Lucas was heard from, he was above Turner and observing him. There was nothing out of the ordinary about his final radio message. Eventually, the 3rd pilot, Major Gene Shaw, joined the mission. He met with Major Turner at the rendezvous point. It was only then that they realized there was no sign of Lucas. The search for the missing pilot began immediately. Hundreds of personnel from the military and search and rescue organizations began to scour the area for the missing pilot and his plane. At first, it was thought that Lucas may have ejected from his plane after he suffered from some kind of malfunction. The planes were equipped with ejector seats, and the pilots had a small survival kit with them that would have allowed them to call for help. November 10th was also the first day of hunting season in the park, which meant there were a lot of witnesses who could provide clues to search teams. Hunters reported hearing a loud noise coming from above, bright lights, and some reported flares or strange smells. Each lead was followed up on, but no sign of the plane or the missing airman was ever located. One potential clue was a faint radio signal that was picked up. The signal matched that of one that would have come from the equipment that Lucas had in his survival kit. It was designed to keep emitting a signal until either it was turned off or the batteries ran out. The search was steered towards the radio signal, but there was still no sign of the plane. Unfortunately, the radio signal might have been a red herring. Hunters in the area would also have used that same kind of radio that Captain Lucas had. A hunter communicating over the radio may have accidentally led investigators in the wrong direction. Weather conditions made the search through the national park even more difficult. After about a week, the official search was postponed. Years later, the search for Captain Lucas and his plane has continued. Private search teams have gone through the forests of the national park, hoping to find any clues that could lead them to answering this strange mystery. Neither the crash site nor any human remains have ever been uncovered. The unsolved disappearance of park ranger Checkers Mashigo from the Kruger National Park in South Africa is one of the strangest missing person cases. At first, it seemed as if his disappearance had been resolved just months after Mashigo vanished without a trace, but DNA results only led to more questions that have gone unanswered. Checkers Mashigo had been a park ranger for 10 years. He was the main breadwinner for his family, and there were no reports of him being involved in anything unusual before his disappearance on December 17, 2020. The day of his disappearance was like any other. Mashigo was working at the Stolzneck section of the national park. The Kruger National Park is located northeast in South Africa and is one of the largest game reserves on the entire continent. Unfortunately, the park has a poaching problem. It's home to a large population of rhinos and elephants, which are particularly attractive due to their ivory. Being a ranger at the park often involves protecting the animals. On the evening of the disappearance, Mashigo went on a typical round with one of his coworkers in the Sikazi River. The two separated at one point but agreed to meet up at a fire road nearby. Mashigo failed to make it to the rendezvous point, and the other rangers were unable to get a hold of him on his radio. He was reported as a missing person, and the search for Mashigo began. At the time of his disappearance, Mashigo was wearing his full ranger uniform and had with him his cell phone, radio, and a weapon. The park authorities utilized canine units and the park helicopter in search of the missing man, but at first, no clues were uncovered. On December 17th, exactly a month after Mashigo disappeared, there was a break in the case. Search teams found human remains as well as items that were believed to be Mashigo's. His family was informed of the disturbing find, and the investigation continued. Now, the police and park authorities wanted to find out what had happened to him. But there was another twist in the case. When the DNA results came back, they revealed that the human remains did not belong to Mashigo. They were actually the remains of a woman. Now the park and police had two mysteries. There was still no explanation for what had happened to Mashigo, and now there was an unidentified woman who needed to be named and laid to rest. It's not clear if the objects that were found with the remains actually belonged to Mashigo, or if it was just assumed that this was the case. It could be that the two cases are entirely unrelated, but if the objects found were in fact Mashigo's, there could be some relation between the woman and the missing park ranger. She could have been involved in his disappearance, and her body was simply placed there to distract authorities. Reports from 2023 revealed a high level of corruption and connections with organized crime within the park. There's no evidence that Mashigo was involved in any of this, but if he stumbled across something that he shouldn't have, or refused to do something that was asked by one of these corrupt individuals, it could have led to his disappearance. Kruger National Park staff and the local police are continuing to investigate the case. Anyone with information in this case can contact authorities at 013-735-1700. In the early hours of the morning of January 27, 2018, over 100 old-growth trees were thrown to the forest floor in the Olympic National Park in Washington. Meteorologists have come up with a few possible ideas to explain the mysterious incident, but each results in its own questions that remain unanswered. The Olympic National Park is home to some of the oldest trees in the world. The Quinault Valley at the southern edge of the park has been called the Valley of the Rainforest Giants. Trees there have been growing for hundreds of years. Some are even believed to be over 1,000 years old. It contains the largest living specimens of many conifer trees. Toppling such giant old trees is not an easy task. So when the park staff woke on January 27, 2018, to find that hundreds of trees had been toppled around Lake Quinault, it was a shocking mystery. Trees had completely fallen or snapped near the base. Only a huge force would have been able to do this. Most of the fallen trees were located on the north side of the lake, in an area just half a mile wide. There were some falls on the southern side of the lake, but these trees were typically smaller than those on the north side. The trees at the northern edge of the lake had toppled towards the water, indicating that whatever had forced them down had come from the north. Scientists estimated that the tree fall happened between 1:30 and 2:30 a.m. They were able to pinpoint the timing further by looking at various tools and instruments that were monitoring the area. Seismographs closest to the fall had recorded a tremor just before 1:30 a.m. This was only recorded at the stations closest to the fall. It wasn't the cause of the incident. There had not been any earthquakes, but rather the fall itself had been so huge it had resulted in a tremor. With the precise time of the incident now known, scientists could look at other instruments to find out what was going on with the weather at the time. While scientists tried to figure out what weather conditions could have caused the mysterious incident, more supernatural explanations were suggested. Some people thought a rampaging monster or cryptid could have been to blame. The relatively untouched forests of the Olympic National Park are said to be home to Sasquatch and other Bigfoot-like creatures. Others suggested that it could have been the result of a UFO landing in the area, with the force of the alien craft knocking down the trees in its wake. A less supernatural but equally extraterrestrial explanation was that there had been some kind of meteor burst, similar to the one believed to be responsible for the Tunguska event, but there was no evidence that this had occurred. Scientists were confident that a weather explanation would be found, but winds of at least 70 to 80 miles per hour would be needed to knock down such old, large trees, and no instruments in the area recorded such winds. One explanation is what meteorologists call microbursts, a column of sinking air that's normally less than 2.5 miles in diameter. They can cause extensive damage, but are usually associated with thunderstorms. There were no thunderstorms reported in the area, which made a microburst seem unlikely. Another possibility is something called a rotor. All the instruments in the region recorded winds coming from the opposite direction to the tree fall, but in certain circumstances, these winds could have been reversed in small areas. The winds coming over the mountaintop might have turned back on themselves, almost as if the wind had fallen or was moving like a wave. The rotor would result in high-speed winds going in the correct direction. While this explanation is plausible, there's nothing to explain why the weather conditions that night would have resulted in such a rare event. Dry Tortugas National Park is one of the most inaccessible national parks in the United States. Only accessible via seaplane or a 2-hour ferry journey, the park is made up of a collection of small islands off the coast of Florida. But beneath the water lie many secrets that are still waiting to be discovered. In the 1960s and 70s, hundreds of ships passed through the area on the way to sites in what is today Mexico and the southern United States. Treasure ships from Spain hauled back gold, silver, and precious gems from the New World to the Old. British ships tried to keep their adversaries under close watch, and all the while, pirates and privateers attacked vessels for loot. Even without the threat of pirates, this was a very dangerous area. The water is relatively shallow, and the warm conditions make it the perfect home for coral reefs. The only coral reef in the continental United States is great for snorkelers and divers, but not for ships, which would often find themselves wrecked. The currents shifted with the season, and the sea floor was constantly changing. On top of this, the area is prone to hurricanes. It's not surprising that many of the ships that passed through the region met their end at the bottom of the sea. According to some sources, it was as many as one ship a week during the height of the route's popularity. Many went down with all hands and all the treasures still on board. The tradition of wreckers goes back almost as long as there have been wrecks on the sites. These entrepreneurs would go out to recent wreck sites and salvage valuables. Once brought back ashore, it will be split between those who recovered the cargo and the ship's owner. The business was very profitable and made up much of the wealth of the Florida Keys West until modern times. But as the area came under government control, the wreckers were replaced by treasure hunters. These would go down to explore more ancient shipwrecks, recovering loot that didn't need to be shared with anybody. In 1935, Franklin D. Roosevelt established the Fort Jefferson National Monument, preserving some of the dry Tortugas. In 1983, Congress expanded the monument, and in 1992, the Dry Tortugas National Park was established. The National Park Service now has control over the countless wrecks that lie beneath Dry Tortugas' waters, with the exception of some wrecks that were already legally claimed by treasure hunters. But just what is down there remains a mystery. It's believed that many of the wrecks that lie in shallow waters have already been explored by treasure hunters, who might not have made great efforts to preserve the historical sites. But there could still be wrecks lying in deeper waters that have gone undiscovered to this day. New ships are still being found and identified. As recently as March of 2024, researchers were able to put a name to a 16th century British warship that was located in 1993. In 1906, Devil's Tower in northeastern Wyoming became the United States' first national monument. The pillar of igneous rock has stood tall against the backdrop of the other hills for millions of years, and has an important place in the local Native American beliefs. But just how the tower was formed is still something of a mystery for geologists. Devil's Tower reaches an elevation of over 1,200 feet above the surrounding plain, and it wasn't submitted until 1893. Long, mostly vertical cracks cover the surface, revealing that the tower is made up of countless hexagonal columns, similar to those seen at Ireland's Giant's Causeway. The appearance was first explained in Native American legends. Different tribes and communities had different stories, but most followed roughly the same pattern. A group of travelers, often young boys or women, were being chased by a giant bear named Mato. Unable to escape, they prayed to the Great Spirit to save them, and the ground beneath them lifted. The bears tried to climb after them, and its claws created the huge cracks seen on the tower today. The true story of the formation of the Devil's Tower is less supernatural, but there are still elements that are a mystery. The tower is made up of a rare igneous rock called phonolite porphyry. It was formed when magma slowly cooled, creating the hexagonal structures that are still seen today. But that's about as far as geologists can say for certain. There are a few different theories, which might all look very similar at a glance. One thing they all have in common is that the tower was once an intrusion of igneous rock into the softer sedimentary rock. The sedimentary rock eroded more easily and quickly than the harder igneous rock, leaving behind the pillar. A similar thing can be seen around the world, including in places like Arthur's Seat in Edinburgh. But geologists aren't sure how that intrusion came to be. In the case of Arthur's Seat, the pillar of rock is the remnants of an ancient volcano, where magma that was filling the neck of the volcano cooled before an eruption. It's possible this is the case at the Devil's Tower, but unlikely. There's no evidence of any volcanic eruptions in the region, although this evidence may have eroded away. Other suggestions involve an intrusion that pushes up into the sedimentary rocks but doesn't erupt onto the surface. Alternatively, there could have been a steam eruption, creating a crater that was later filled with lava, which cooled and eventually eroded into the tower. The differences may not seem like much at first, but Devil's Tower is the largest known example of columnar joining, the technical term for the hexagonal pillars. Finding out how this structure came to be could play an important role in better understanding the geological and geophysical processes that our planet goes through. Paranormal mysteries aren't necessarily the first thing that comes to mind when it comes to national parks. But with so many people losing their lives in the wilderness or simply vanishing without a trace, it's not surprising that many national parks have their own ghost stories. The Grand Canyon National Park is believed to be one of the most haunted. Hundreds of people have lost their lives in the harsh conditions of the Arizona desert. If paranormal legends are to be believed, at least some of them have continued to hike along the trails and stay in various lodges even though they're no longer alive. Of the paranormal stories from the national park, the story of the Wailing Woman of the Transept Trail is the most well-known. The Transept Trail is described as a moderate trail along the north rim of the Grand Canyon. It goes between the Grand Canyon Lodge and the North Rim Campground and is roughly 2 miles in length. For most hikers, it wouldn't put up too much of a challenge, at least compared to some of the other trails that the Grand Canyon has to offer. But the one thing it has that most of the other trails don't is the mysterious Wailing Woman. Hikers who are caught out after sunset have heard the cries of a woman in the distance. Some have even claimed to see the mysterious figure. She's dressed in a white dress with blue flowers and wears a scarf around her neck. According to legend, the Wailing Woman first appeared around 1928, when the Grand Canyon Lodge was being built, or shortly after it had opened. The woman, her husband, and son decided to stay at the lodge. One day, the husband and son went on a hike along what would become the Transept Trail. Even though the Grand Canyon isn't known for its wet weather, thunderstorms aren't that uncommon, especially in the summer. According to legend, the two were caught out in stormy weather and lost their footing. They tragically didn't survive the storm. When they didn't return to the lodge, the woman went out in search for her family, only to realize they wouldn't be coming back. The woman then returned to the lodge alone and never left. Since then, she's been spotted along the Transept Trail, presumably still looking for her husband and son. She's also been seen at the lodge. When a fire struck in 1933, witnesses reported seeing a woman's face in the flames. The lodge was rebuilt, and the visitors and staff have reported that there's one door that will not remain open in the new building. Anytime it's left open, an unseen force slams it shut. For those who don't believe in the supernatural, the story of the Wailing Woman can be explained by wildlife and pareidolia, but it could also be evidence that there are paranormal forces at work in the world. Crater Lake National Park is the only national park in Oregon. For most, it's a scenic destination of untouched wilderness, but some remember it best as the scene of an unsolved crime that remains a mystery 70 years later. It was in the park, not far from the lake, that Albert Jones and Charles Culhane lost their lives in 1952. Despite extensive investigation by the FBI and amateur sleuths, the case was never resolved. Albert and Charles were executives of United Motor. Both were from out of town, but Albert was the manager of the company's West Coast office, and they were touring his sales area. On July 18, 1952, they had a meeting with Frank Eberlein, who sold parts for the company in the area. The following day, they didn't have any business to attend to and decided to spend time fishing in the lake. They had arranged to meet with Frank, another sales operator named John Vaughn, and Frank's son in the afternoon after Frank had finished work for the day. Around 3 p.m. on July 19th, the Eberleins and John entered the park. Just a few miles down the road, they came across a green 51 Pontiac sedan that Frank had recognized as belonging to the two executives. The keys were still in the ignition, and the radiator was hot. They assumed that Albert and Charles had just stopped to see a nearby site and would be back soon. After about an hour, they realized that wasn't the case. Frank and John went back to find a phone to notify authorities, while Frank's son Alan waited in the car. When the older men were gone, another car drove up slowly to the Pontiac, but sped off before Alan could get a good look at the car or the people inside. It wasn't until Albert and Charles were discovered that he realized just how suspicious that was. After the authorities were alerted, a search and rescue operation got underway. The two men were in their 50s and not the most physically fit, so it is possible they simply ran into problems while out in the wilderness. 2 days after they went missing, that hope was extinguished. The men were found about a quarter-mile south of Highway 62, in a wooded area some distance from where their car was found. Both men were lying on their backs and had single bullet wounds that had taken their lives. Both were shoeless, but only one pair of shoes was missing. Cash and watches were also missing. The disturbing discovery only led to more speculation about what might have happened to them. Some suspected that this was simply a robbery. The Santo gang were in operation in the area. Even though the gang's leader, Jack Santo, was known to be in California at the time, many of his associates were in the Crater Lake region. They would typically rob their victims before taking their lives, and it seemed that Albert and Charles's case lined up with their modus operandi. However, others thought that the case was connected to some kind of business deal. Both men were important figures in the company, and it's possible their positions could have attracted people who might have wanted to do them harm. Other suspects in the case include John Wesley Cole and Kenneth Moore, who'd previously been convicted of blinding and robbing trappers. A woman claimed that Moore had confessed to the crime to her late husband, but both men had already passed away before the confession was ever revealed to authorities. All of the prime suspects in the case have since passed away, and 70 years on, it's likely that anybody involved in the crime is no longer alive. But the families of the victims are still hopeful that answers to this disturbing, unsolved mystery may one day be revealed. Canada's Nahanni Valley is in the Northwest Territories and is home to some disturbing legends and mysterious secrets. One of the few unexplored places left on Earth, the valley seems to keep its secrets close to its chest and doesn't want anybody to solve the mysteries. The disturbing stories about the valley and the Northwest Territories go back thousands of years according to the legends of the indigenous people. The Dean people have lived in the area for thousands of years, but they apparently were not always alone. According to the Dean stories, there was once a tribe known as Naha, who were more violent than the Dean and would come down from their mountain homes to attack the other tribe. The Naha suddenly disappeared one day, leaving behind no explanation as to what happened to them. It will be easy to dismiss this as nothing more than a story, but the valley and the river are named after the Naha people. It seems likely that there was once a tribe that lived here, and something happened to them. Some believe that they may still live hidden in the mountains, and could explain the more recent mysteries. During the Yukon Gold Rush, a few prospectors tried to travel up through the Nahanni River to get to the gold fields. Among those were the McLeod brothers. In January of 1904, the three brothers went into the valley to explore and search for gold. They found nuggets but lost them on their way back to civilization. William and Frank McLeod were determined to go back, taking with them another prospector named Wire. The men took canoes up the river and were never seen alive again. It was 2 years before search parties stumbled across the camp, located in a section of the valley called the 200-Mile Gorge. The partial remains of both McLeod brothers were found in the tent, but both were missing their heads. The third individual, Wire, was never located. The McLeods weren't the only people to meet that grisly fate. A few years after the McLeods mysteriously passed away, another prospector met a disturbing fate in the same valley. Martin Jorgensen had found gold in the area and had written home about it. In 1917, Martin's body was found beside his cabin, which had been burned down. Martin's remains were in a similar state to that of the McLeod brothers. In the following years, a number of other prospectors were found in a similar matter. There was at least one other occasion where a cabin was burned down. In that case, investigators claimed that there had been a problem with the stove, but many people had their doubts. Not all those that disappeared into the wilderness of the Nahanni National Park have been found. In 1926, a woman named Annie Laferte disappeared while out with her hunting party. She was never seen alive again. Annie's case makes more sense than the mysterious cases where people have been found. Even today, the park hasn't been properly explored from the ground, and there are likely parts of the park that humans have never set foot upon. Many different investigators have tried to dismiss the paranormal stories that surround the mysterious national park. Most of the famous crimes from the park took place during the gold rush, and it's possible that greed was to blame for those crimes. But that hasn't stopped stories of UFOs and mysterious lights seen in the wilderness, which some believe were connected to the incidents. One of the stranger natural national park mysteries is that of the Old Man of Crater Lake. For over 100 years, the log of a hemlock tree has floated in the water, completely upright and without any roots. The log was first noticed in 1902, the same year that Crater Lake became a national park. A geologist surveying the park made a note of the strange upright log, but didn't spend too much time thinking about it. A few years later, the mysterious log was still floating upright, and the park staff finally decided to give it a name. It was christened the Old Man, and legends about it soon began to appear. The Old Man is about 30 feet long, but only roughly 4 feet is visible above the water. The rest lies submerged. But the lake is thousands of feet deep, and the base of the tree doesn't touch the floor. It also doesn't have any root systems and floats about the lake. Scientists recording its movements discovered that it can actually move quite quickly on windy days, but it's never been pushed completely beneath the surface. Due to just how much it moves, the Old Man was deemed a hazard when scientists wanted to survey the lake with a submersible in 1988. They decided to tether the Old Man down near Wizard Island, another mysterious location factor of the lake. According to legend, as soon as the Old Man was tied down, the weather made a turn for the worst. It began to snow in August, and the scientists were unable to conduct their survey. The Old Man was untethered and the skies cleared. Whether this story was the beginning of the legend or just later proof is unclear. but it's said that the old man has some control over the weather of Crater Lake. If that were the case, rather than simply drifting wherever the wind goes, that would mean the old man uses the wind to get to where the log wants to be. Away from the more paranormal parts of the mystery, it's still not certain just how the old man stays floating upright in the water. Carbon dating has shown that the log is roughly 450 years old, but it's possible that it hasn't spent that long in the water. Scientists have theorized that it may have once been attached to a root system, which became weighed down with rocks that kept it floating upright. Gradually, the root system was worn away by the water, but the submerged part of the old man was so waterlogged that it remained balanced upright. This is the most cohesive explanation, but there are still unanswered questions. It's not clear how the log could have been preserved for so long, while the root system didn't last. There have been other cases of trees and logs being pushed into bodies of water and floating upright for a while. Something similar was seen after the eruption of Mount St. Helens, but in that case, the logs only lasted a short while and eventually toppled over or sank. For now, the old man shows no signs of going the same way and continues to float untethered and unobstructed in the Oregon Lake. In 1983, a man and a young boy hiking in the Yosemite National Park made a disturbing discovery. It was a human hand and arm, apparently having been recently thawed out. A few years later, more remains were found, but it would take decades until the person was ever identified. Even now, what actually happened to the Summit Meadow Jane Doe remains a mystery. The Yosemite National Park in California attracts roughly 4 million visitors annually. In June of 1983, Tom Dolly and his friends were among them. He stumbled across the human arm in Summit Meadow, an area at the heart of the park. The authorities were contacted and a search of the area took place, but no other remains were found, and there was no explanation for how the arm had gotten there. Investigators determined that the arm had been severed sometime between the fall of 1981 and the spring of 1983. It also seemed likely that some animal predation had taken place, which meant it was possible that it had been brought to that location from somewhere else. The case quickly went cold. It wasn't until 1988 that more remains were found. This time, a skull was uncovered not far from where the hand was previously located. The police connected the two pieces of remains, and later, DNA would confirm they belonged to the same person. With the skull, the police were able to put together facial reconstructions and appealed to the public for information about the Summit Meadow Jane Doe. DNA testing would eventually confirm that the woman was white and had once had blonde hair and blue eyes. Investigators estimated that she was in her late teens or early 20s, but the facial reconstructions included a lot of guesswork, and it didn't lead to any tips. In the meantime, the dangerous criminal, Henry Lee Lucas, made a confession that seemed to solve the case. He claimed to have picked up a hitchhiker between the town of Corona and a mountainous park in California. The description of the woman and the location seemed to line up with the Summit Meadow Jane Doe. He claimed they ate fried chicken together before he took her life. Lucas was even able to describe the campsite, which the police later located. But Lucas later recanted his confession. He'd made hundreds of confessions during his time in prison, and only a fraction of them were ever proven correct. While some members of the investigating team continued to believe that Lucas was responsible for the Jane Doe's passing, others were skeptical. The case once again went cold in 2022, when genetic genealogy finally gave the woman her name. She was Patricia Hicks, who'd gone missing in September of 1982. Hicks was originally from Washington, but had moved to Merced, California around 1980. She was vulnerable at the time, having gone through some recent personal tragedies, and ended up following a religious movement that most would describe as a cult. In December of 1980, the cult got into trouble with the law, and leader Donald Eugene Gibson was arrested. He was later found guilty of a number of serious crimes, but fled the country before he could be put behind bars. Not long after Gibson disappeared, Patricia decided it was time to move on. She left Merced and didn't tell her roommate where she was going. Patricia was never reported missing, which meant that there was no reason to believe she was the Summit Meadow Jane Doe. But after DNA testing confirmed this was the case, it left more unanswered questions. Some suspect that Patricia's connection to Gibson could have been what cost her her life. It's known that many of the cult members were scared of him, there's a possibility that she wasn't as supportive of him as he or his close followers would have liked, resulting in her tragic passing. It's also possible that Patricia ran into trouble in the wilderness and passed away due to natural causes. Investigators haven't been able to say for sure what caused Patricia's passing, and it may be that foul play wasn't involved at all in this unsolved mystery. Carl Landers was an experienced mountaineer with ambitions of climbing to the top of the highest peak in every Californian county. He'd managed a few when he and two friends set out to climb Mount Shasta in May of 1999. It had snowed overnight, but that wasn't much of an issue. The mountain itself wasn't particularly a difficult climb, though its height could lead to altitude sickness. Usually, climbers set off from the 50-50 camp above the tree line in the early hours of the morning, but Carl and his friends had a later start time in mind. Carl was feeling unwell, but instead of delaying the climb, this prompted him to set off ahead of his friends. He left the camp at around 9 a.m. with plans of meeting his friends at Lake Helen. This is the last confirmed sighting of him. Around 30 minutes later, his friends began to follow him up the mountain. One turned back early on, leaving the second friend, a man named Melton, to catch up with Carl alone. When he reached the lake, Carl was nowhere to be seen. He asked a ranger if he'd seen anyone, and the ranger described speaking to an older man that matched Carl's description. The man was visible on the trail ahead, and Melton began to follow him, thinking it was his friend. However, after a short time following the hiker, Melton realized he was going too fast to be Carl, and he didn't think his clothing matched. Melton turned back and returned to the camp, thinking Carl must have turned back as well. When he realized Carl wasn't at the 50-50 camp, he and the second friend alerted authorities. Despite many searches of the mountain at the time and in the years since, Carl has never been found. It's likely he was suffering with dehydration, which, combined with the altitude, could have led to him getting disoriented and lost, later dying from exposure. However, if that is the case, how has his body never been found? It remains a mystery. George Pinka Jr. had been on a hike with a group from his church when he went missing from the top of Upper Yosemite Falls in 2011. The 30-year-old was in a group of around 20 people hiking up to the top of Yosemite Falls on June 17. The weather was pleasant and the trail itself is relatively well maintained and not difficult to hike. However, it's fairly steep and long and connects with other hiking trails. The group reached the top of the falls at around 2:40 p.m. Once at the top, they dispersed and planned to regroup to hike back to Yosemite Valley. It's not clear how long they were at the top of the falls or where any of the hikers went during that time, but when they regrouped, George was not with them. They assumed George must have begun walking back down the trail alone, and it doesn't appear as if there was any significant search at the time. It wasn't until the group made it back to the valley that evening that they realized George wasn't back at the base and reported him missing. Around a dozen helicopters and more than 100 search and rescue workers searched the falls and surrounding trails over the following days. Around 70 square miles of rugged terrain was covered in the extensive search, but there was no sign of the missing hiker. After around a week, the search was scaled back due to a lack of clues about his whereabouts. Part of the issue may have been the confusion about when exactly George went missing. Officially, he was last seen when the group reached the top of the falls, and it was assumed he wandered off at some point while the group was dispersed. However, it's possible George didn't make it to the top of the falls at all. Not long after he was reported missing, George's cousin claimed he hadn't been feeling well due to the trek to the falls and turned back before. It was possible he took the wrong trail back and got lost in the park. If that's the case, it's possible the early search efforts were focused in the wrong place. Either way, there's been no sign of George since his disappearance, and his case has gone cold. The United States isn't the only country where national parks can become the last known locations for missing people. Countries all over the world face the problem of people disappearing in the wilderness, some to a greater extent than others. James Norman went missing in strange circumstances from West Cape Ho National Park in Australia in 2015. The 33-year-old and his friend had gone out to fish on Dunsky Beach on February 18. They both knew the area fairly well, and James was confident in the water, so when he decided to go for a swim, after drinking a cask of wine, neither were too worried. James swam to nearby Shelley Beach. His friend watched him reach the shore and walk along the beach and onto a rocky outcrop. After that, he disappeared from sight and hasn't been seen since. His friend reported him missing when he couldn't find James, and an extensive land and sea search took place. Police didn't believe there was any criminality involved, but were concerned for his safety and urged anyone to get in touch if they had any information. There were a few reported sightings at a nearby campsite, but police were unable to confirm whether this was really the missing man. Most believe it's likely James got back into the water, possibly in an attempt to swim back to his friend. Though a strong swimmer, the sea can be dangerous no matter how experienced someone is, so it's possible he was swept away from the beach. However, if this were the case, it seems unlikely that none of his remains would have come ashore. The area is known for shark sightings, particularly great whites. Though shark attacks are fairly rare, it's possible James was attacked, although again, there would likely be some kind of evidence for this. Some local to the area have a darker theory. It would have been difficult for the friend to have seen James on Shelley Beach without binoculars, and some suspect the mile-long swim in shark-infested waters would be unrealistic. The theory implies James never made it to shore in the first place, and something happened to him either on his swim to Shelley Beach or while he was still with his friend. Christina Kaleka was not an experienced hiker or camper, but had decided to go with a small group of friends to the Rainbow Falls Provincial Park to enjoy a long weekend off work. The group of 4 young adults arrived at the park in Ontario, Canada around noon after setting up camp and taking a nap, and stayed up until around 4 a.m. They made a bonfire, enjoyed food, and chatted. At the time, it didn't seem as if there was anything out of the ordinary on Christina's mind. Despite the late night, Christina and a friend, Eddie, woke up at 6:30 a.m. Eddie was a friend from church and somebody Christina knew relatively well. Both wanted to go running, but Christina wanted to run along the park trails, while Eddie preferred the nearby highway. Instead of compromising, the pair split up. Eddie returned to camp an hour later, but Christina didn't come back. The group, which included Christina's cousin, reported her missing a few hours later. Since 2009, there have been multiple searches organized by both Ontario police and Christina's family. Hundreds of search and rescue workers searched the park and the nearby Lake Superior for any signs of her, with planes and even a submarine used at one point, but each search turned up nothing. There are 2 main theories as to what happened to Christina. The first and most obvious is that she got lost while wandering off the trail and possibly injured herself, or was attacked by one of the wild animals that calls the park its home. It seems unlikely that no one would have found any evidence of this in the many searches that took place, but it is possible, and cadaver dogs did indicate that they found human remains in the river at one point, though the water was too dangerous to search properly. The other darker theory is that Christina met with foul play. Christina's family did not believe anyone she went camping with would hurt her, and there's evidence she was at the campsite that day before she disappeared. Police repeatedly interviewed the 3 friends Christina was camping with, but nothing came from them. It's possible she may have run into someone else while jogging in the park, and was taken out by an opportunistic attacker. Millions of people visit Yellowstone National Park every year. The park covers almost 3,500 square miles, most of which is wilderness, and is known for its wildlife and geothermal features. More recently, it's become known as a hotspot for disappearances, but this isn't entirely accurate. The vast majority of people who go missing in the park are found relatively quickly, and most self-rescue, getting back on track without needing help from a search party. Sadly, 47-year-old Dan Campbell and his Australian shepherd dog, Freckles, are in the minority of people who go missing in the park and are never recovered. Dan went missing in April of 1991. He and his brothers had been saving up for a move from their home in Idaho to White Sulphur Springs. As part of that, Dan had been getting involved with what his brothers described as shady characters and engaging in illegal activity. On April 4th, 1991, Dan and Freckles were dropped off at the trailhead for Hellroaring Creek. He was allegedly planning to hike through to Jardine, Montana to pick up some elk antlers he'd collected and saved for later. Collecting elk antlers in the park was not legal, but would bring in thousands of dollars. Dan was reported missing 4 days later when he didn't arrive in Jardine. In the meantime, there had been severe snowfall, and even though Dan was an experienced outdoorsman, there was no worry that he may have been injured in the snow. An extensive air and land search began the following day, though snowstorms and avalanche warnings hindered operations. There was no sign of Dan or his dog, and his family and authorities began to believe something more sinister had occurred. Collecting antlers seemed like one of the most non-violent activities that could take place in a national park. The animals themselves naturally shed their horns, so there's little need for them to be killed in order for hunters to profit. However, the large sums of money involved has attracted people willing to protect their territory with semi-automatic weaponry. They fear another hunter may have considered that Dan was trespassing on his territory and killed him to protect their trade, or that one of the other shady characters he was involved with committed the murder. Authorities have also suggested it's possible Dan may have willingly disappeared to start fresh somewhere new, though his family doesn't believe this is possible. Dan would be in his 70s now, and if he didn't willingly disappear, it's highly likely he passed away decades ago, though neither him nor his dog's remains have ever been found. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.